Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our small footprint. My name is Nyssa. If you're new here, we are a family of 8 who live off-grid in Australia. Today's video is a kitchen video. I posted last night on Facebook that I made pie for dinner and dessert yesterday and had some requests for the recipe, so I thought I'd get it up first thing today, and I've got some other stuff I'm working on for the next few days while I'm on my grocery trip. I also hit 4,000 subscribers last night or the night before. Thank you very much, everyone, for that. That is just amazing. When I started the channel full-time in November of last year, so 11 months ago, I had no preconceptions of how the channel would progress, and I've been very pleasantly surprised by the growth, and it's been pretty amazing. I have a whole bunch of seeds to give away as well, some excess seeds after I've done all my things and that I saved, so I'll try and get that done in the next couple of videos, maybe after the weekend, because I've got my grocery shopping this week, so I might do it as a weekend catch up with all my seeds that I've got, that I've saved, that I can give away to anyone who is interested in getting some more seeds for this year. I've got a whole bunch of loofah seeds because we peeled all our loofahs, quite a few pepper seeds. I've got some Aji pineapple seeds, and those peppers are amazing. They're these bright red, bright yellow chilies, and they have this fruity flavor to them, which they make the cowboy candy superb. So, and they've germinated really well for me this year. Some Kajari melon seeds as well, I think, a few other things. So I will do a video up and I will offer up those for anyone who wants them, to say thank you, everyone, for the 4,000 subs, and we'll get that sorted. But thank you, everyone, and today's video is pies. I have a steak pie and an apple pie, so enjoy watching, and I'll see you next time. As we work through everything that's left in the fridges before the next shopping trip, we eat some of the stuff that's probably a little more time consuming, but to use up what we've got well. So today I decided to do pies, and I posted these up on Facebook and had a couple of requests to make sure that I put the video up as well. So I'm getting that done today because I filmed it, because I tend to turn the camera on whenever I'm in the kitchen anyway. So I made 2 pies. First one up was a beef pie, so I had a piece of chuck roast that from the quarter of a cow left, so I pulled that out and I chunked it up into fairly even size, sort of, 2 centimeter square cubes, I suppose, and cut that all into sort of uniform shapes. Then after I had chunked it all up, I covered it with some flour and some salt. I just did it by eye, sprinkled a bit of salt over it, and probably, I don't know, a quarter of a cup of flour, and mixed it through well, just to give each piece of beef a bit of a coating of flour. This is going to brown off in the pan, but it's also going to add a thickening agent later for the gravy, so it's a worthwhile step to do, to just add that little bit of flour and that little bit of salt to the meat, just to make it will improve the end result. So then I heated up a bit of ghee. I do half ghee and half oil in the pan, and once I heated that up, I started browning the beef in batches. So you don't want to overcrowd the pan, because if you put too much meat in there, it's not going to brown, it's just going to stew. So you want to have just cover the bottom of the pan, a single layer sort of thing, and you want to move it around till you get some nice brown crust all around it. So that brown crust is adding flavor. It's the flour is cooking, which gives it that sort of a nutty flavor, nutty smell, but it's also cooking the fat off, and it's giving the edges of the beef some nice crust as well. So all of this process is to do with flavor, and honestly, you do not have to do it. You can just throw everything in a pot as is, but you will get a bit more depth of flavor by taking the extra step, and I had the time today, so that's what I'm doing. I have many times just thrown everything in a pot and gone, that's fine, it'll work, because I didn't have the time, but today I had the time, so I took it. So I cooked all the beef off in batches. I used it in 2 batches. I probably should have done it in 3, but 2 worked out okay. And then while that was going, I sliced onion, garlic, and celery. I would normally add carrots to this, but I didn't have any carrots left. The kids have eaten them all as snacks, so there was no carrots in the fridge. But you could add any vegetables you want, really. Anything you add is going to bulk up. It cooks for a few hours, everything goes soft. I normally just do onion, garlic, celery, and carrots. Didn't have any carrots, didn't really want to add potato because I was going to serve it with potato mash, so I just left it nice and simple. Diced it all up nice and small uniformly. once the beef I've done all the different batches of the beef in the fat to brown it all off. Once that was all done, then you want to use what's left in the pan to cook off. So if you put your onions and I don't put garlic in straight away, but onions, your celery, carrot into that pan, they're going to, as soon as they hit the heat, they're going to release some liquid, which is going to help take up some of that browning off the bottom of the pan. You want to make sure that browning hasn't burnt. It just wants to be brown. And if it was burning, then you need to turn the heat down and pull the meat off a little bit sooner. But then you put all those veggies in there and they'll sweat and start to help bring off some of that browning. If it's not working, just deglaze the pan a little bit with you could use wine if you wanted. I just used a bit of chicken stock. So a little bit of extra liquid in there, and cook off the veggies until they're soft and most of that excess browning and that flavour has come up off the pan into the liquid. And then I added some more stock. So I added a jar of mushroom stock because I had it on the shelf, and the rest of the jar of chicken stock. Obviously beef pie, you would normally use beef stock. I don't have any beef stock at the moment, so this is what I had and what I used. And added the beef in there as well, and a couple of bay leaves. I also added some pepper, some Worcestershire sauce, some garlic, things like that in there as well. You could use any sort of hard green herbs if you wanted, some rosemary, some thyme, anything like that, whatever flavour you were after for the pie. This is when you need to flavour it. And then you put the lid on it and have it going on simmer for 2.5 hours, and that will the meat will end up at a point where you can pull it. You can sort of break it in half with a spoon, but it doesn't fall apart because you want those chunks of steak in there. You can then thicken it up with a cornflour slurry. I didn't show anything that I did here, but you can add a couple of tablespoons of cornflour to some of the warm liquid, mix it up, and then pour it back into the pie and mix it through, and it will thicken it up like a gravy if you need to. And then I threw it all into a Tupperware container and stuck it in the freezer to give it a chill because I'm doing it all same day. Ideally, you'd cook your meat the day before, stick it in the fridge overnight, and then make your pie the next day, but I didn't plan that far ahead, so I stuck the meat filling into the freezer to chill while I made the pastry. So I've had some issues with shortcrust pastry over the years and not finding the right balance because we don't use butter. So I found that the all olive oil ones ended up far too short and they just broke. They didn't hold their shape. I didn't like the all ghee ones, not only because ghee is more expensive, but it had a similar texture to the olive oil one because ghee is liquid. Like it's not a solid fat. Like of course, like lard and ghee and oils, if you stick them in a cold enough situation, then they are solid. But generally speaking, they aren't a solid fat. So this time I decided to do half lard and half olive oil, and it worked out perfectly. I'm really happy with this batch. So I did about 400 grams of plain flour with 60 grams of lard, 60 grams of oil, and about 110 grams of water, though you have to sort of have a look at that when you're making it. And I made sure the water was cool, and then a pinch of salt. And I used my Thermomix, so any food processor, Thermomix, anything like that works, because you just want to bring it to ball stage, a bit like you do pasta, those little tiny balls. So you're just blending it enough to bring it into those little tiny balls, and then once you do that, you pour it out onto a dough mat, and then you bring it together a bit more there. So from using pasta and things like that lately, I've learning more about the handling of this kind of a dough. I've got my my bread doughs and stuff down pat. I know what I'm doing there, but pastries and stuff weren't something that I had done a whole lot of. So I'm doing the same sort of thing. Less handling is better. So I'm bringing it together, but I'm not making it a sort of a uniform dough. It's sticking together, but it's not. I'm not playing with it too much. I'm just sort of bringing it together into a disc. I split it into two and wrapped each one in cling wrap and stuck them in the fridge for half an hour, and then decided that that was good and I was going to try it that way. When that half hour was up, I pulled them out and I rolled them out roughly for the pie dish. Again, I'm going for rustic here, not perfect, so I'm trying not to handle it too much. I'm trying to get into a sort of a fairly uniform circle using my Thermomix dough mat here that has the sizes on it, and rotating it to do so that I'm not using my hands or the rolling pin on any particular spot too much, so that I'm trying to move around the dough, and then I poured it into the pie dish. So I have these the I'm not sure, they're the chasseur ones maybe, the pie dishes, and then I placed it in there and gently manipulated it into the corners of the pie and up the side. So I want it to hit the very top because pie dough shrinks when you're cooking it. This one didn't shrink anywhere near as much as some of that I've had before. Again, something, you know, a pro for this, but I might up my ratios a little bit so I've got a little bit more pastry to work with for each pie dish next time, because it didn't come quite up as high as I would have liked. So I just gently manipulated it into the corners and then put a piece of baking paper over the top of the pastry so that I could blind bake it. Now I use chickpeas as my blind baking beads, and I just keep them in a jar and reuse them as needed for blind baking. They're a nice cheap item to use. I did have some of the ceramic pie weights, but I have no idea where they are, and chickpeas, at least if they go missing, then they're inexpensive to replace. So poured those in there as the weights and made sure that it sort of fit into the shape of the pie, patted it down slightly so that it was in the shape of the pie, and stuck them in the oven. And then I repeated the process. I had a second base to do, so I did a second base as well, did all the same steps. I baked it for about 15-20 minutes, and then I took the chickpeas out and baked it for another 5 minutes without them in there, and then pulled it out of the oven. We're just looking to create a bit of a skin on the pastry, I suppose, so that when you put the filling in, it doesn't just soak straight into the pastry. It has a little bit of a barrier before it does that. So then I pulled them out and I filled them with the mix. So I filled the first one with the steak mix. My gravy could have been a little thicker, so I just used a spoon and scooped all the solids out, and then the gravy we will warm up and have it over the top of the pies when we serve it. So I filled the pies. You want to fill them fairly full because everything does sort of move around, and the pastry will cook better if it's sort of domed rather than concave. So you want to fill it nice and full. Filled the with that, and I just used store-bought puff pastry for the top. I don't make puff pastry. It is inexpensive to buy. It stores in the freezer well, and it's, yeah, I buy puff pastry. So you can use shortcrust on the top here too, of course, but puff pastry is just one of those things that's nice on the top of a pie. So I placed that over, and I just trimmed the corners to fill the gaps and things like that. I'm not fussy about how it looks. It's all about the taste and the texture. So I make it work, and then on the edges you want to sort of roll and pinch the puff pastry to go in where the short crust pastry is on the sides of the pie dish, so that they sort of meet, so that you're not getting seepage of the pie while it's cooking. And again, I do it all just however it works. Because the bottom was blind baked, you can't sort of squeeze the bottom to the top pastry, but it works, so I do it that way. And then I repeated the process with the apples. So I used a jar of the stewed apples that I had from when I canned my 180 odd kilos of apples. We're getting through these for various different things, and it's just plain stewed apples. There's probably 1/4 cup of sugar in the whole batch, and then a bit of water, and then they're just stewed down and jammed into jars and processed. So they're sliced. It's a really nice thick sliced pie because it's got a lot of body of apple in it. They went into the oven for about 45 minutes, was about how long it took, but take that with a grain of salt because, of course, I'm cooking in a hooded barbecue, and I have to be careful of how I heat the barbecue because these dishes are ceramic, they're not cast iron, so I can't have them over the open flame or anything like that. So you have to assess that based on your oven. But I did it for about 45 minutes at about 180, 200, and then they were done. So I served the beef pie up as soon as it came out because that's what happens here. Pies definitely slice up better if you rest them for a little while. The pastry holds better, the filling sets up a little bit, much like my lasagna the other day, which sort of fell apart when you put it on a plate. They do tend to just collapse if you cut them up while they're piping hot, but it was dinner time and the food was ready, so that's what happened. So I sliced up the beef pie and we served it over just mashed potatoes, and this was just potatoes that I had steamed and then mashed with a little bit of ghee. Served them up with the pie over the top. Some green veggies probably would have been nice here, but I go grocery shopping tomorrow, so we're a bit low on a lot of things at the moment. There was probably some frozen ones in the freezer, but I didn't think about it at the time. So we just had mash with the steak pie for dinner. When I cut the apple pie, of course, it held together a lot better because it had sat while everyone ate dinner, so it had sat there for a while. So you can see that the short crust pastry, it actually held into a pie shape, so I'm really happy with this batch of pastry. You could pick up that slice of pie as is and eat it if you wanted to. Of course the filling's going to go everywhere, but the shape of the crust and the texture of the crust, it was biscuity and flaky, and it held its shape. You could cut it into slices of pie, and it was really nice for presentation, which is completely unnecessary. The really short pastry that I've made before tastes fine. It's perfectly good, but it just doesn't look as nice when you're slicing it. And sometimes you just want a pie to look nice. They're a lot of effort, so you want them to slice up and look good to, you know, to make that effort feel worthwhile. So thank you again for joining me today, and I will see you again in the next couple of days with some more videos.